Welcome to Vote Who with me, Lauren Booth. With just days to go before the British general election, we're tackling the big questions that the politicians are either struggling or perhaps refusing to answer. Vote Who is live every day at this time until the end of the week. And wherever you're from, we invite you to put your queries about election topics to our panel. Today, we're talking women in politics, in this election, and in the voting process. If you've got a question you'd like to ask on this subject, then you can call us now on +44 208 601 4555 or send us a text on +44 780 000 8066. If you'd rather send us an email, then you can do that now too. Email votewho@presstv.co.uk to have your question asked live on air. You can see the numbers on the right-hand corner of your screen now. Today, I welcome Lindsay German. Lindsay is author of several books on women's rights. She is also chair of the Stop the War Coalition. Lindsay, welcome.
Hi Lauren.
Now, it's been an exciting election in that suddenly it's gone from a two-party race to a three-party race. But if you watch the debates on television, one thing's the same: three men in grey suits. We're still trapped in the 70s, aren't we, politically?
Or even earlier, because it's quite amazing, really, when you look at how little women are playing a role in this election. There's actually a statistic which shows that it will take another 40 parliaments till women have equal numbers of women MPs. Now, that means that everybody who's a candidate now will be dead before that happens. So it tells you how ridiculous it is that women have had the vote for nearly 100 years now, and we're still a very, very long way from that.
I think the other unfortunate detail to this election is how much the runners' wives have featured. It's been about hemlines, it's been about which woman has the nicest smile, who's the best with her children, who's a good mum. It's all very retrograde. Why are we judging women in this election on their power to be wives to powerful men?
Well, especially because all the women concerned here clearly could be politicians in their own right if they wanted to be, clearly do have very important jobs and public roles in life. And it tells you something, that still the whole business of mainstream politics anyway is very much dominated by men, which is quite different from lots of campaigning politics. I mean, we in the anti-war movement, there's lots and lots of women involved at every level with the anti-war movement, the peace movement, the different solidarity movements. When it comes to Parliament, there's lots of women in Parliament, working in Parliament, but very, very few of them get to be MPs, and it seems to be the older men who are the ones who still hold on to these positions. There's
been talk about the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, the two big parties in the UK, wooing the female vote through an internet site called Mumsnet. The idea that women vote on marriage or issues like school or can be won over with nice glossy campaigns. Does that appeal to you?
Well, I think it's an insult to women's intelligence, really. It assumes that women are the people who care about families. Well, all right, women do care for their families, but so do men. This should be a concern to everybody. And frankly, the bribe by the Tories that they'll pay people £150, they'll be £150 better off if they get married. I don't think you can fool many women into getting married if they don't want to.
OK, well, let's go to our first question now, asked by a member of the public when we were out and about in London earlier this week.
Parliament's often seen as an old boys' club. What are you going to do to change the culture to get more women involved in Parliament?
So, Lindsay, more women in Parliament, how would you go about that?
Well, partly you have to make sure there is some kind of positive discrimination in favour of women getting into Parliament. A lot of these seats, the safe seats for Tories and Labour, have always been seats where the men used to come to the top. Having women-only seats is a big way of doing it, but also I think it's much more fundamental than that. Women still earn less money than men, they still aren't expected to play such a part in public life, and we've got to have a whole system of radical re-education, which means women beginning to do these things for themselves, beginning to campaign, fighting to get into these positions, and then hopefully we can change things that way.
But interestingly, although this particular election campaign has become about constitutional reform or reforming the electoral process, shall we say, the first past the post, it hasn't been about getting more women elected like the 1997 election was. Why is that? Did Blair's babes let us down so much that our parties are no longer interested in women in government?
Well, I think part of the problem is that some of the Blair's babes, as they were called, if you look at what's happened with some of those women in the Parliament, if you look at people like Jackie Smith, who were involved in the expenses scandal, which affected all politicians, the women haven't particularly come out well from this Parliament, with a few notable exceptions, but by and large they haven't stood up against the party leaders. The Labour women in particular have very much been part of towing the line, have allowed themselves to be used in a more sort of decorative role rather than in a really political role.
You know,
so I think this does make people a little bit cynical about it.
I think what occurs to me is that the media has some blame to take on this, because reading the national newspapers in the UK over this past 3 weeks, the only time you'd see a female MP is if she makes a gaffe. If her skirt goes up like Marilyn Monroe, or if she says something that isn't to do with the party line. You know, we've got Theresa May, Shadow Women's Minister. There's Harriet Harman, Deputy of the Labour Party. Why aren't they on the front pages?
Where are they?
Where are they?
I mean, who knows where they are, because they're certainly not part of the campaigning. And, you know, when you have things like Sarah Brown and her very nice red wedge shoes, which, you know, I like looking at shoes as much as anybody else. But I really think when it's trivialised like this, and I do think the media has some responsibility, we're not talking about a lot of issues. And if you look at the issues, women are much more anti-war than men are, for example. On a whole range of issues, women's opinion is different from men's if you look overall. And these are the kind of questions it would be interesting to debate.
Well, let's take another question now and debate that.
There are more women than men in this country, so do you think there should be at least 50% female MPs in Parliament?
So we've been talking about that already, about the number of MPs in Parliament. But what about the rise of the type of woman that's being wooed into the parties themselves? There's been a lot of writing in the national papers about conservative women. Now, once upon a time, these were known as older ladies, perhaps, very married with a certain lifestyle in the home counties. The Tory party has gone out of its way to break that mould, looking at people from different ethnic minorities, you know, students, younger people. Is that a good step forward, and is it working? Is it true?
Well, I think the problem is they are looking at a new layer of women. If you remember the old Tory party, as you say, the Primrose League and the really staid old middle-class suburban women was very much a mainstay of the Tory party. That's changed because Cameron wants it to be much more modernised. But then you look at what they're standing for. They're not standing for policies that will help most women. They're standing for policies which actually will increase the gap between rich and poor, will make very, very savage cuts. All the parties are talking about cuts.
That's because of the way the selection process is done. Women who have strong views, like perhaps yourself, against the war or against the government policies, you know, there is no left-wing female movement in this country.
Well, that's one of the problems, and I think we definitely need one. I mean, I recently wrote a little manifesto for feminism in the 21st century, because I think we really do need to start re-raising some of the demands that were raised in the 60s and 70s.
Thanks, Lindsay. We're going to go to our caller now. Welcome to Vote Who. What's your question?
Hi there. My question is do you believe that women in particular have to be like Harriet Harman and quite bullish to get somewhere in politics? I mean, they're not treated fairly and they have to be quite aggressive to gain some sort of respect.
So women, do they have to be like men in order to gain respect in their parties?
Exactly.
Well, they definitely shouldn't have to behave like men. Unfortunately, in some cases, they may have to be very aggressive to get anywhere. But my experience of campaigning with women is that many, many women have an understanding of what needs to be done, have got fantastic skills in terms of organising and debating and discussing things and motivating people.
But the lifestyle of being a parliamentarian is horrible.
Is not good for anybody.
You know, thank you for bringing up Harriet Harman, because Harriet Harman was told to shut up and never come in again to the campaign headquarters by Lord
Peter Mandelson. Yeah. Well, are we surprised at that? Because Peter Mandelson has behaved like this